The laughter began before the single father even realized he had become the joke. Hundreds of people stood beneath the bright afternoon glass roof of the Harrington Foundation's charity estate, dressed in expensive suits and elegant dresses, while a tired man in a simple navy jacket stood near the edge of the garden holding his 8-year-old daughter's hand. Then the CEO raised her champagne glass, pointed toward him, and mocked him in front of everyone. The crowd laughed. But less than 5 minutes later, the same people would fall completely silent when a decorated army general walked through the gates, stopped in front of that supposedly insignificant father, and raised his hand in a military salute. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change a person's life, please like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so our family can continue sharing stories that remind us what truly matters. The man being laughed at was Everett Calloway, a 42-year-old single father who had spent most of his adult life learning how to survive without complaining. He repaired industrial equipment for a living, worked long hours at a small maintenance company, and raised his daughter, Elsie, with the kind of quiet determination that rarely attracted attention. Everett did not own an expensive car. His shoes had been polished so many times that the leather had begun to crack, and the navy jacket he wore to the charity event had belonged to his late father. Yet he had been invited because he had spent the previous year repairing several pieces of donated equipment for the Harrington Children's Foundation without charging a cent. The foundation's staff knew him as dependable, patient, and generous. Everett never considered himself extraordinary. He simply believed that when someone was struggling, you helped if you could. Elsie was the reason he lived that way. Her mother had died several years earlier after a long illness, leaving Everett to become both parent and protector. He had learned how to braid hair badly, pack lunches, sign school forms, attend parent meetings, and work overtime without letting his daughter see how exhausted he was. Elsie knew money was tight, but she also knew her father never made her feel poor. He would turn a simple picnic into an adventure, transform broken furniture into science projects, and tell her that the most valuable things in life were the things nobody could buy. When the invitation to the Harrington charity celebration arrived, Everett almost declined. But Elsie had begged him to go because she had been invited to help distribute books to children during the afternoon event. Seeing the excitement in her eyes, he borrowed his father's old jacket, combed his hair, and promised her they would stay only long enough to fulfill their volunteer duties. The woman hosting the event was Celeste Harrington, a brilliant and intimidating CEO whose technology company had become one of the fastest-growing firms in the country. Celeste had built her reputation on confidence. She was admired for making difficult decisions, negotiating impossible deals, and never allowing anyone to see weakness. But somewhere along the way, confidence had hardened into arrogance. She had begun measuring people by their clothes, connections, titles, and bank accounts. When she saw Everett standing beside the book table, she recognized him as the mechanic who had repaired the foundation's old equipment. Instead of thanking him, she frowned at his worn jacket and asked one of her assistants why someone who looked like a maintenance worker had been allowed into the VIP garden. Everett overheard the remark but pretended he hadn't. He had spent too many years being underestimated to let another insult ruin his daughter's afternoon. He knelt beside Elsie, helped her arrange a stack of children's books, and smiled when she proudly told him that 3 little boys had already chosen adventure stories. Everett told her she was doing important work, and she beamed as if he had given her the greatest compliment in the world. Unfortunately, Celeste saw the exchange and decided the moment presented an opportunity to entertain her wealthy guests. She walked toward the center of the garden, raised her glass, and casually remarked that charity events sometimes attracted people who confused volunteering with belonging. Several guests laughed nervously. Celeste looked directly at Everett and began describing him as an example of someone who had apparently wandered into the wrong social circle. She joked that his jacket probably cost less than the flowers on her dining table and suggested that perhaps the foundation should start checking people at the gates. The laughter grew louder. Everett felt his face burn, but he refused to look angry. He glanced at Elsie instead and saw tears gathering in her eyes. That hurt more than the insult itself. He could tolerate humiliation directed at him, but he could not bear watching his daughter learn that kindness made a person weak. Everett gently took Elsie's hand and prepared to leave. He did not argue with Celeste. He did not insult her. He simply thanked one of the Foundation volunteers, returned the unused books to the table, and started walking toward the garden entrance. But before he could leave, an elderly Foundation trustee named Marjorie Bell stepped in front of him. Marjorie had known Everett for years, and she knew there was something about him that most people did not understand. She had once asked why he always refused payment for emergency repairs. Everett had simply told her that his father had taught him never to walk away from someone in trouble if he had the ability to help. Marjorie looked at Celeste with disappointment, but Everett quietly told her not to make the situation worse. He did not want revenge. He wanted Elsie away from the cruelty. As they reached the entrance, a sudden commotion came from the driveway. Several security officers moved aside, and a black government vehicle stopped near the garden. A tall man in a perfectly pressed army uniform stepped out. He was General Malcolm Rourke, a highly decorated army commander who had been invited to honor the Foundation's Veterans Program. The guests immediately straightened. Conversations stopped. Celeste's expression changed as she recognized him. General Rourke walked past the stunned crowd without looking at the expensive tables, the cameras, or the important executives. His eyes were fixed on one person. Everett Calloway. For a moment, Everett seemed confused. Then the general stopped directly in front of him, stood perfectly straight, and raised his right hand in a formal military salute. The garden became silent. Everett slowly returned the salute. Celeste lowered her glass. General Rourke then reached out and embraced Everett like an old friend. The crowd watched in disbelief as the decorated general thanked him for saving the lives of several soldiers years earlier. The truth began to unfold. Everett had once served as a military engineering specialist overseas. During a devastating equipment failure at a remote base, several vehicles had become unusable during an emergency evacuation. Everett had worked for nearly 2 days without sleep, repairing critical machinery under dangerous conditions. His technical decisions had helped evacuate dozens of wounded soldiers before the situation became catastrophic. But that was not the whole story. General Rourke explained that during the evacuation, Everett had discovered that a young soldier had been trapped inside a damaged vehicle. While everyone else was being ordered to move, Everett had gone back. He had risked his own life to pull the soldier free. That soldier had survived and eventually returned home to his family. General Rourke had never forgotten the man who chose another person's life over his own safety. Everett had never told anyone about it. Not his co-workers. Not the Foundation. Not even Elsie in detail. When asked why, he always said that he had simply done what needed to be done. The general looked around the garden and explained that Everett had left the army after his daughter's mother became seriously ill. He had wanted to be present for his family instead of chasing promotions and medals. He had traded a prestigious military career for a smaller life filled with school lunches, repair jobs, grocery lists, and bedtime stories. To Everett, that was not a sacrifice worth boasting about. It was simply being a father. The guests who had laughed moments earlier now looked ashamed. Celeste was especially shaken. She stared at Everett, realizing that the man she had judged by an old jacket had lived a life she could never have guessed. But Everett did not celebrate her humiliation. He noticed the tears in her eyes and walked toward her. Celeste struggled to apologize. She admitted that she had judged him because she had become obsessed with status and appearances. She confessed that the success she had built had made her afraid of looking ordinary. She had spent years believing that power meant never allowing anyone to see vulnerability. Yet standing before Everett, she realized that true strength had been standing quietly while an entire crowd laughed at you and still refusing to become cruel. Everett accepted her apology, but he told her forgiveness did not erase what had happened. The words were gentle, not angry. He explained that Elsie had watched everything, and children remembered moments like that. Celeste understood immediately. She walked over to Elsie, lowered herself to the child's level, and apologized directly to her. She did not excuse herself. She did not blame the pressure of business or the crowd. She simply admitted that she had been wrong. Elsie looked at her father before answering. Everett gave her a small nod. The girl finally accepted the apology, but then said something that made Celeste's eyes fill with tears. She told the CEO that her father always said people could become better if they were brave enough to admit when they were wrong. That sentence changed the entire atmosphere. Celeste later asked Everett if he would help redesign the foundation's equipment program. She wanted to create a scholarship and vocational training program for single parents, veterans, and struggling workers who had practical skills but lacked opportunities. Everett initially hesitated because he did not want charity for himself. Celeste clarified that she was not offering him pity. She was asking him to help build something that would give other people the chance he had never asked for. Over the following months, Everett became an advisor to the foundation. He taught young workers mechanical skills, helped veterans transition into civilian employment, and continued raising Elsie with the same humility he always had. Celeste changed too. She began visiting the foundation without photographers, listening more than speaking, and learning the names of employees she once ignored. She discovered that leadership was not about being the loudest person in the room. It was about making sure the people who were rarely heard finally had a seat at the table. The most beautiful moment came nearly a year later, during another afternoon gathering at the foundation. This time, Everett stood at the front of the room wearing a simple suit. Elsie sat proudly in the first row. General Rourke was there too. Celeste stepped onto the stage and announced that the foundation's new scholarship program would carry the name of Everett's late father, the man who had taught him that helping others was never something to be ashamed of. Everett struggled to hold back tears. He looked at Elsie, then at General Rourke, and finally at Celeste. The same woman who had once laughed at his worn jacket was now applauding him with tears in her eyes. But Everett did not think about revenge. He thought about his father. He thought about the soldiers he had helped. He thought about his daughter growing up believing that dignity mattered more than wealth. General Rourke stepped forward one final time and saluted him. This time, everyone in the room stood. Everett returned the salute with trembling eyes, but his greatest pride was not the military recognition. It was seeing Elsie smile. She understood something that day that would stay with her forever: a person's worth could never be measured by a suit, a bank account, a job title, or the opinions of a crowd. Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the greatest story. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the person who has spent a lifetime lifting others. And sometimes the greatest victory is not making the people who hurt you regret what they did, but becoming so strong, so kind, and so forgiving that their cruelty no longer has the power to define you. Before we reach the end, leave a meaningful comment telling us what you would have done if you had been standing in that garden when everyone began laughing. Would you have spoken up for Everett, walked away, or waited until the truth was revealed? Your answer may remind someone else that courage is often as simple as refusing to laugh when someone else is being humiliated. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because our community is built on one simple belief: kindness is never weakness, forgiveness is never surrender, and a person's true value is revealed not by what they own, but by what they are willing to give when nobody is watching. And as Everett watched his daughter walk toward him at the end of that unforgettable afternoon, he realized something his father had understood long before him. The world might judge you by the clothes you wear, the money you earn, or the people standing beside you, but none of those things can measure the size of a human heart. The crowd had laughed because they thought Everett was nobody important. Then a general saluted him, and everyone finally saw what had been there all along. But Everett knew the salute was never the real reward. The real reward was his daughter seeing her father stand tall without becoming bitter, watching a proud woman learn humility, and knowing that one act of kindness had traveled farther than any medal ever could. He squeezed Elsie's hand, smiled through his tears, and walked home with her beneath the bright afternoon sky, carrying no trophy, no title, and no need for revenge, only the quiet certainty that he had remained exactly who he had always tried to be, a good man.